Good morning from Tokyo and good evening for those participating from the US. Welcome to the ACYPL Town Hall Meeting, Pandemic to Podium Perspective from Japan. I am Akio Okara, the president of Japan Center for International Exchange, JCIE. JCIE is a non-profit organization established in 1970. And we have been fortunate to have the relationship with ACPL since 1973. And over the last 50 years, a lot has happened. But the program we have with ACYPL is one of the longest standing programs that we have, and which I think is a testament to the value of the program. Over the years, we have had more than 350 young political leaders from the US come to Japan to get a Japan experience. And from Japan, we have had many young political leaders go to the US to experience the US, over 300 of these people. And so we have a very large alumni group. And one of the strengths of the ACYPL is that we have a lot of alumni participating in many of our programs. GCIE has many programs, Washington, DC based, but I think of course, US is a very big country, and in Japan also. Tokyo is not Japan. So I think the value of ACYPL is to have sub-national exchanges. And I think increasingly these programs are important. Because of the COVID pandemic, unfortunately, we have not been able to have in-person meetings, but thanks to the modern technology, we are connected through these online Zoom meetings. Hopefully, we'll be able to welcome many of you participating from the US to Tokyo and Japan in the not too distant future and have in-person meetings. But today, we will have this online meeting, and this is going to be a very exciting and a very busy week in Japan because as you know, Japan will be hosting the Olympic Games starting on Friday. Of course, some events are already starting today, and so it is a very busy week. And so we are very grateful to have all the Japanese speakers agreeing to participate in this program. And I'm sure we'll have a very, very lively and informative program. And I would like also to thank all the participants from the US for participating in this town hall meeting. And so without any further ado, I would like to pass on the proceedings to Dr. OJ Oleka, who has kindly agreed to moderate the session. And OJ, as I said, is one of the prominent alumni of the ACYPL program. OJ, please.
Well, I appreciate that. I don't know that I would say prominent, but I am definitely an alumni. I'm blessed to be with you all today. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this virtual town hall hosted by the American Council of Young Political Leaders in the Japan Center for International Exchange. This town hall is being interpreted in English and Japanese by talented simultaneous interpreters. Please select the language you want to hear by clicking on the interpretation button at the bottom of the Zoom window. Again, my name is Dr. OJ Oleka, and I am thrilled to be moderating this discussion. I traveled on the ACYPL Exchange to Japan in 2019 and was hosted by Dai and the incredible team of the Japan Center for International Exchange. It was a hugely impactful experience and allowed me to make connections to folks across the United States and the world. Japan remains a keen interest of mine due to my experiences there, and I, like many, have been closely following the preparations and discussions surrounding the Tokyo Olympic Games, which begin in just a few days and, of course, are already on their way in a lot of ways, as we said earlier today. When I was in Japan before the pandemic hit, the Olympics were indeed one topic of discussion among many others. Since then, however, COVID-19 has become the central topic of so many conversations and has added challenges and complications to a variety of issues that were already existing all over the globe. So today, we're going to dive right into the current pandemic scenario in Japan and then talk about what this all means for the Olympic Games. Before we start, I will introduce our distinguished speakers. First, we have Miss Keiko Geichi, who is staff writer for the Asahi Shimbun, a Japanese daily newspaper. Based in Tokyo, she is currently covering Japan's policy in the COVID-19 pandemic and its vaccination program. Most recently, she was a London-based political correspondent from September 2017 to March 2021 and covered UK politics and science affairs, including Brexit and the UK's handling of the pandemic. Thank you, Kayoko, for joining us. We also have the Honorable Koichiro Kobayashi, a member of the Okayama Prefectural Assembly, an office he has held since 2011. The Honorable Kobayashi is a physician by profession and previously worked as a hematology and oncology doctor at the Okayama University Hospital, specializing in hematopoietic stem cell transplantation. Honorable Kobayashi graduated from the Okayama University Faculty of Medicine in 2002 and later attended the Okayama Institute of Government and Management while working as a doctor. Honorable Kobayashi is a member of the Liberal Democratic Party and traveled on an ACYPL exchange to the United States in 2011. Thank you, Honorable Kobayashi. It is great to be connected with our alumni in Japan. We are joined by another ACYPL alumnus, the Honorable Kohei Ojima, who is a member of the Tokyo Metropolitan Assembly. He belongs to the Tokyo's First Party and currently serves on the Public Enterprise Committee. Prior to this role, he served as a member of the Nerima Ward Assemblyman. Kohei traveled on an ACYPL exchange to the United States in 2015. Finally, we have the Honorable Toshiko Takeya, a member of the House of Councilors, the upper house of Japan's National Diet. Representing Tokyo, she was first elected in 2010 and served as Director of the House of Councilors Budget Committee, Director of the Special Committee on Okinawa and Northern Problems, and as a member of the Committee on Agriculture, Forestry, and Fisheries. She is currently a director in the Women's Division of the Komeito Party. As a certified public tax accountant and a certified administrative procedures legal specialist, Honorable Takeya previously worked for Deloitte Touche Tomatsu and A-Beam Consulting Limited on international development projects. Thank you to our speakers for joining this discussion in what is early morning in Japan. I'd like to take a moment to remind our audience that they can submit questions in the chat and that to enjoy this conversation, please click the interpretation button at the bottom of the Zoom screen and select English or Japanese as the language you'd like to hear. With all that said, let's start our discussion. And I'd like to begin with an overview of how things stand now in Japan regarding in-country travel and restrictions in public places and how policies are formed. Honorable Takeya, would you open the conversation by commenting on the national status of Japan regarding COVID restrictions and then briefly discuss how national policies are formed? And if you're muted, make sure you're unmuted.
はい、皆様、日本の方おはようございます。また、
Good morning to you all, and good evening to you in the U.S. I'm Toshiko Takeya, member of the House of Councilors, and thank you very much for inviting me at this ACYPL town hall. I'm so grateful. And thank you so much for all on part of the organizers for making this possible. And I look forward to all the, and say hello to all the other panelists. The infection countermeasures in Japan, which was the first question. What is the current state and how is it decided?
Yes, that's right.
The infections, so Tokyo and Okinawa, which have severe case rises. We have an emergency situation. However, infections that are worsening, not to the degree of Tokyo and Okinawa, but for the other 4 prefectures that are rising, we have the intensive measures to prevent the spread. And there are other areas. So there are 3 kind of categories, I would say, in taking anti-infection measures. This is decided part of the national government, and the specific measures are decided by each prefecture. The emergency declaration that is applied currently in Tokyo, in fact, it is not a mandatory, but we require voluntary constraint and restraint for non-essential outings. And which also applies crossing prefectural borders as well. And for hosting events, there is a cap on the spectator number, depending on the capacity of the venue. And for eateries, they are not allowed to serve alcohol. And they are asked to reduce their opening hours. Since the corona pandemic has been prevalent in the whole of Japan, consistently we have been asking most people who have actually stick to that protocol of wearing masks, and we have also asked to avoid 3Cs, which is close contacts, confined places, as well as large numbers in closed confined spaces. And many of the Japanese nationals have rendered their support by behaving and by obeying these protocols. So therefore, though it's been voluntary, but the majority of the public have obeyed these orders or requests, I would say. And the Japanese case number yesterday is about 3,000. And I understand that in the United States, you have been seeing shooting numbers of 50,000 of cases daily. And therefore, population-wise, we still have a small ratio. However, we have a steep hype or a spike in the rate of the increase of case numbers, which we are concerned about to some degree. So this gives you a short summary of the current state in Japan.
Great. Thank you very much for that, Honorable Takeya. And now let me turn to Honorable Dr. Kobayashi. Would you comment on your region's circumstances and explain how policies are enforced? Could more have been done to confine the virus? And again, if you're on mute, make sure you unmute. I think we're having some trouble hearing either the speaker or the interpreter. So we will come back to that question as soon as we can get that figured out. And until we can do that, let me ask the Honorable Ojima this question. Looking at Tokyo's... Oh, I think we can hear you now.
Okay, sorry. My name is Kobayashi Koichiro. Good morning, everybody. In Okayama, as we are very close to Osaka, and where there has been a big surge of increase. So in Okayama, the hospitals and hotels and accommodations for infected people were very tightly all occupied. And so we have been trying to regulate people for gathering for events and restaurant openings. And so we have a COVID-19 cluster, what we call OCID, as a task force to tackle the infections.
And so we are hoping that this cluster intervention team can provide medical dispatch to regions where there have been high increase. But for the very highly infectious variant, we are very, very concerned about how much we can address the issue. We have asked that restricted opening times for restaurants, the eateries. On May 16, we had an emergency state declared. But since then, the peak number was 189, and we have been able to bring down the number of infections. The hospital beds have been released somewhat, but we are worried that there might be another wave. This is COVID is an issue that has to be tackled as a public health issue. So we are not, it's more the public space that has to be addressed rather than the hospitals and the medical forefront. So we really need to stop the infection at the root where the public gathers. So in June, we said that I made a statement at the assembly that we have to bring down the number by having a very strict inspection system to keep track of the data and make sure that the spread is well addressed and monitored. So we are also worried about people who are staying at home not being able to be admitted to hospitals and dying at home because they were not admitted. And so we need to face the challenge of people staying at home infected, making sure that their symptoms do not become worse all of a sudden, and that we need to expand online medical consultation systems and allow people to have access to medical advice, even at home.
Great. Thank you very much for that response, Dr. Kobayashi. And now let me turn to the Honorable Ojima. For Tokyo, the largest city and the capital of Japan, how has the region responded to try to basically deal with the virus and its impact on business, work, and quality of life?
My name is Koyohei Ojima. In the Tokyo situation right now, I'd like to report on what's going on. What we are doing is what Takeya-san and Kobayashi-san have mentioned. But what's different from Okayama is that we are now in the fifth wave, where there's a sudden surge and we are now in the fourth state of emergency, but there has not been any break put on the spread of the infection. Yesterday, we have about an average of 1,200 people per week, and we are worried that this average will increase to a level above 2,000. And for people admitted to the hospital, we now have over 2,400 people admitted to the hospital, and we are worried that their symptom might aggravate, which means that it would have a lot of pressure on the medical forefront. And now that we are entering into the summer vacation period and children out of schools, and the Delta variant now is becoming the major source of spread. We are very concerned about how the spread will continue to expand. As for its impact on the business, work, and quality of life, at the moment, we are asking people in Tokyo to refrain from going out. But this is the fourth time we are asking that people are getting used to the situation being asked to stay home. So even from the political side, we call it the risk communication. We are worried that this risk communication is not not having an impact as it should. As for the impact on business, Tokyo has many economic measures in place, relief measures, a lot of personnel and rental subsidies giving. We are trying to give as much economic subsidies and relief measures as possible, but not sufficient enough. The surge of increase has a great impact on the economy itself. So the basic solution would have to be to tackle the COVID-19 to make sure that it does not spread any further and have further impact on the economy.
Wonderful, thank you. And now we'll ask Ms. Getchi to sort of respond to that. What is the outlook of the public regarding the Japanese government's responses to the pandemic in terms of restrictions and the vaccine rollout? What has been the media's part in the response to the pandemic?
はい、よろしくお願いします。聞こえますか？大丈夫ですかね？はい、ありがとうございます。
Can you hear me? Thank you very much for the introduction and the question. In Japan, the government's measures, the public has a good understanding and tries to follow it as much. I was in England, in UK until March, but there has been very, very strong measures with penalization. But in Japan, there is no penalization. It's not mandatory, but I see people following the rules almost 100% and are very cooperative. And they are trying not to eat out in groups, wearing masks. Everything is quite normal, and everybody's taking that in. But this restriction has been going on for so long that people are starting to be weary of it, tiring out. So with restrictions on not being able to offer alcohols in restaurants, that slowly some people are not following the rules any longer. They just want to find a place where they could let out their frustrations. And so I think that is a time weary issue. And for the vaccines, the rollout is still rather slow. Most of the public do not think it is a successful rollout. It's more of a failure, but people are patiently waiting their turns. For the aged population, it was rather slow. And in Japan, we were not able to produce vaccines domestically for the longest time. So this delay in shipment and getting the vaccines to Japan was very, very slow. And many people now, and also then we had the medical issue of who can give the vaccinations. And finally that we have everything measured, put in place, the vaccines did not come as planned. And so there has been a lot of blockages and challenges. For the media's role, we know that we have a very important role to play. This is an unprecedented pandemic, and so we are always giving trials and errors in what is needed, what kind of information needs to be made public. And we are following data, following the medical frontline. We have very strict regulations on ourselves, and vaccines is very important. The media is stressing the fact that vaccination is very important in order to regain a normalcy in our life. So we are following those kind of lines of stories.
Great. Thank you very, very much for that incredibly detailed and important
はい、ありがとうございました。
information
詳
in
し
terms
く
of what you
大
need
事な
to
情報を
know.
ありが
And
とう
the
ござい
final
ました。
question for
私
this
の仕入れ
section
情報として、
is
問として
for the Honorable Dr. Kobayashi, and it is about the vaccine
小林
rollout.
先生がおっしゃったその
And that's been different
ワクチン
everywhere.
の接
What
種
vaccines are
ですけ
available?
れども、どういったワ
Who
ク
has
チン
been
を提供され
vaccinated?
てますか、それか
And
ら
what are
誰
the
が対象
challenges
者
right
で
now
しょ
to
う
get
か。
the vaccine
ま
into
た、
farms?
ワクチンを接種する課題は今どこにありますか？ Yes, in Japan, Pfizer and Moderna vaccines are being used. The Pfizer vaccine are being used for the medical profession, as well as for the municipal vaccinations. Moderna, in fact, is being used for corporate workplace vaccinations of more than 1,000, as well as at the mass vaccination sites. Above 65 or over, in fact, nationwide is around 60% and 65.5% in Okayama. In fact, we ranked number 9 who have got 2 shots of 65 or over. And 22.3% have received, in fact, 2 shots, and Okayama is 25.4% and 14th, ranks 14th nationwide. That is for all, including the 65 or over. In Okayama Prefecture, we have first vaccinated the medical profession, and also we have asked general physicians or doctors to go and visit or have their patients come to their clinics. And also, we are now making vaccinations available at medical institutions throughout the prefecture, which is quite unique. And in fact, this has made the vaccination more accessible. Also, remote areas as well as areas that doctors do not reside in, we have the Medical Association of Okayama dispatching doctors there for vaccinations. So therefore, on top of the workplace vaccinations that have started, as well as on top of the mass vaccinations, in fact, we have seen an outpacing of the expected demand to the supply, and therefore we're asking the national government to provide supplies of vaccines. In fact, we also need to protect the, in fact, we see a plus or positive externalities from vaccination, because in fact it serves for the public good of not only serving for the well-being of those who are being vaccinated, but we're going to try to get more people to get vaccinated and to get the message out. Thank you.
Thank you. And these answers are incredibly detailed and very helpful for each of the folks listening. I do want to shift now to what it takes to put on the Olympic Games. And so I'll go ahead and ask this question to the Honorable Takea, shifting our focus to the Olympic Games and the outlook before COVID-19 struck. The last time Japan hosted the Olympics was the 1998 Winter Games in Nagano. The question is this: before the pandemic, what did it mean to the people of Japan and Tokyo specifically to win the bid for the 2020 Summer Games in terms of national pride and geopolitics? Well, thank you for your question. The Olympics that are to be hosted were met by the unprecedented pandemic. But before that outbreak of the pandemic, as a host city, in fact, it was to celebrate recovery from the 2011 Great East Japan earthquake, and to thank everyone who gave, in fact, a lot of support in the restoration process of especially the Tohoku region, which is northeast from Tokyo onwards or beyond Tokyo.
And with this pandemic, which has been postponed by a year in hosting the Olympics as an outcome, in fact, it has been the Olympics and the Paralympics have been recognized as for introducing culture of Japan and creating exchange programs to have them known to the world. And we expected economic business benefits as well, or profits to be enjoyed by businesses. However, with this pandemic, we have various restraints or constraints, as we've talked about earlier, in hosting the games under the emergency declaration in Tokyo, and especially in venues outside of Tokyo, even if the case numbers are rising or shooting, we are not going to have any spectators in hosting the games or matches in the venues. However, with the support of municipalities, in fact, I think we are creating history together with all the support we're getting from those who support the hosting.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you very, very much. The next question actually will go to Honorable Ojima. And it's interesting. I think many in the audience might be curious as to how bidding to host the games even works, and who in the Tokyo government, in the Japanese government really, or private business have to collaborate to decide to host the games. So Honorable Ojima, given your background, could you shed some light on the process? Just talk about when did preparation start for the 2020 Summer Games, and what was going to be unique and spectacular about these games?
When
this was about 10 years ago when Japan had and Tokyo entered the bidding for the Olympics. It was right after the 311. So the key word then was recovery, how we were going to recover from the 311. So Olympic Games and Paralympic Games were supposed to be a symbol of showing to the world our appreciation for their cooperation in recovery. So this was about 3 governors ago that started the bidding to have it in Tokyo. So there was a lot of lobbying, advocacy being made, and lots of budget being put, but for all the assembly members, none of us really know what exactly went on. When the organizing committee went out, there had been talks about reviewing on how the process began, but we found out that there was no real record being left on how the bidding went on. So we really don't have any details on how people started to go for this bidding. And we know that Tokyo was at the head of trying to bid. So for our current governor, Ms. Koike, we wanted to leave a legacy of triumph over the recovery and the COVID, but this has been all washed down, has gone down the drain. At the moment, our major concern is having a safe event, that there will not be any new surge in infections. We do not have people being infected because of the Olympics, that there is no impact on the people living in Tokyo or any of the regions in Japan. So, but all the measures being taken at the front line, the international borders, are not enough. We are not even sure if that is really having any positive effect, because there have been some infections being still noted afterwards. So we are just trying to make sure that all the tight and safe measures are in place.
Thank you for that. It's actually, it kind of leads into the next question, and it's almost funny to talk about, but in ordinary times, hosting the Olympics can cause restrictions, disruptions, and even displacement for local residents. Let's turn to Ms. Getchy. Was restriction of public space a fear among the public as Tokyo prepared for the 2020 Games?
Very generally speaking, before the pandemic, there was a very positive atmosphere towards the Olympics. So we were thinking that we saw in previous Olympics that having all these facilities being built for the Olympics could be a burden for that region, but we had a very positive outlook. No matter what, it would have a great economic impact. We would all be looking forward to a great reap of profits. But at the moment, the 2015 polls show that it was quite positive, despite the challenges and other burdens that will be posed on Tokyo and other regions. People were still very, very looking forward to the Games.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. And to wrap up this section, I'm actually going to ask a different type of question. And Honorable Dr. Kobayashi, I would like for you to answer this. In a larger sense, what was the viewpoint outside of Tokyo regarding the summer 2020 Games before the pandemic? What was seen to be the national benefit?
Yes. In the Olympics, principle is that through these sports activities, it's for global cooperation and unity. And for those during that time, it's the time when all conflicts are put to end. People are supposed to come together for peace and respect for peace. And so for the Tokyo Olympics, there has been 18 athletes participating in the Olympics. So we were all very much sharing all these members, representing all prefectures. And so we were hoping that they would be an inspiration for the younger generation to look forward and to have so many athletes, that we thought by having this would be an inspiration for the younger generation, but also increase the pride of our prefectural residents. And we have also volunteered to host some of the pre-Olympics training sessions, camps in our prefecture. We were supposed to have Bulgaria come to our prefecture because we have since 1970 sister city agreement between a city in Bulgaria. So we thought that we could increase economic and personnel exchange programs with Bulgaria through hosting this pre-training session.
Wonderful. And actually, to begin into the third section, Honorable Dr. Kobayashi, we're going to stick with you because you touched on something that I think is important for us to discuss now. Speaking about these upcoming games specifically, many in the audience understand there are divisions in the Japanese public over the Olympic Games. moving forward this summer. Can you break down from your perspective the current attitudes and the environment in which the games will occur? What has changed since the pandemic, and is the scientific community in Japan for or against the Olympics moving ahead?
I am
also a doctor, and so before the pandemic, we were hoping that the medical field, that people can really enjoy sports regardless of age or capabilities, handicaps, and so we were hoping that this would be a universal thing to promote sports, but now with the pandemics, we are more concerned about protecting the lives of people in Japan, whether it is really possible to have a safe operation organization at the Olympics. So in June, the medical profession had sent in a list of recommendations that from the medical front, the scientific opinion is that there are two opinions. First, that it is very crucial that the infection does not increase because of the games, and that because of the games, the medical frontline is not given overly extra burden and pressure. So we're very concerned that the increase because of the Olympics could spread throughout the country and also add extra burden to the medical frontline. And we have been very worried that the measures, no matter how strict, would not be sufficient to keep up with ensuring the safety of people in Japan.
Thank you for that medical perspective. Let us turn to Ms. Getchy on this as well. Some studies, for instance, in the New England Journal of Medicine, have argued that the scientific preparations in place are not sufficient and the games should be canceled. What measures are being taken from your perspective to protect the Japanese public from the influx of international athletes? Just tell us a little bit about what you have witnessed in the country and what you have seen over the past few weeks.
Yes, thank you. The New England Journal of Medicine, of course, this has been quoted frequently in Japan as well, and it has aroused much concern in Japan as well, and the playbook has been revised. There are certain strict measures that have come in place, especially the bubble which restrict the athletes from just moving from the village to the venue and to their practice venues, and not to mingle with the public. Compared to this, organizers as well as the media, the public fears that the bubble is not as strict for them. 14 days of self-voluntary isolation is required for those traveling from overseas to Japan. However, the media has exceptions by shortening this to 3 days or so. And therefore, it's feared that the bubble has a loophole that may lead to the spread of infections. Convenience stores as well as restaurants, if you have a private room at a restaurant reserved, is also allowed, and so forth. For the last several weeks, in fact, the athletes as well as organizers, there have been more than 55 cases reported today of positive infections, and In fact, the missing athlete from Uganda was found yesterday, who fled the bubble. So therefore, we do have hopes and expectations, and we're excited, but there are also concerns at the same time.
Well, that certainly makes sense given what you've just touched on. There would be concerns. And that's the question I want to ask to Honorable Takea. Given all that we have heard thus far today and what the country has experienced, what is your main concern about the public's attitude towards the games moving ahead? And do you anticipate those attitudes changing once the games are occurring?
すいません。誰の態度が変わっていくとおっしゃる。はい、心配をして、一番やっぱり心配をしており
Well,
ます。
what I'm most concerned about, if I could start with concerns, is that there will be a large influx of athletes and organizers from overseas. And though we are asking for voluntary restraint of the public, but with the Olympics in town, perhaps we may have some public viewing in private venues, that is. And if this should accelerate the infections, is the concern that we have. So we'd like to stop that the best we can. However, at the same time, by having the Olympics have not been covered extensively by the media as it would be in a peaceful time, that is, without the pandemic. And the bubble that the athletes are in, organizers still have not been obeying the rules, which is a skeptic concern that has been reported to the media, and that has caused or aroused concern amongst the public nationwide. Most of the media coverage has been to that negativity. However, once, in fact, the matches start and the games start, I think perhaps that might soften the concerns and there might be some genuine interest being aroused. But once the games start, I hope. But there will be no spectators at the venues, except one, that is. Compared to other Olympics, this is a completely this is complete change. So therefore, the athletes would miss the spectators, of course, to cheer for them. But they could be more focused, perhaps, on the game itself, which might be a positive aspect. And commercialism has been shaved off, I would say. And through the media or through the television or broadcasts, perhaps spectators could still actually enjoy from home the games, as well as the athletes could focus on the games themselves. And cheering, for instance, you can actually cheer in various ways, not necessarily by broadcasting content alone, which will be experimented to the joy of Japanese as well as to the global audience.
Thank you very much for that perspective and how the games now have changed from the perspective of spectatorship. I want to ask this question now to Honorable Ojima in terms of economic activity. The Olympic Games cost a lot to put on. How is this being handled by the Japanese Olympic Committee? Is the International Olympic Committee providing extra assistance for the unprecedented measures that have to be put into place? And if you could, please speak a little bit about how much was lost due to postponement, and could you explain why the games could not be canceled or postponed again?
すでに今、
Already, we have been postponed by 1 year, and on top of it, no spectators. So we have about 300 billion yen already lost by postponing 1 year. But yeah, so now we're thinking 90 billion yen loss for not having any spectators because we would not be able to get ticket revenues. So we are getting no subsidy from IOC because International Olympics Committee have no obligation to take over any of these losses. So in the Tokyo prefecture, the agreement was that Tokyo prefecture would be second to the Japanese organizing committee to taking on the financial burden, which means that the Japanese government is not responsible, and Tokyo has a very, very difficult time right now with its financial situation being pressured with the COVID-19 measures. And so we are at a loss on how to take over this financial burden.
Nearly 400 billion yen lost. That is certainly a massive number and one to be remembered. And that is the final question that I have. And I would like for each of you to answer this question. And it is, in fact, about the games and how they will be remembered. So that is my question. How do you believe these games will be remembered to the people of Tokyo, the people of Japan? And the Honorable Kobayashi, let's start with you. What is your opinion on how these games will be remembered?
Hi.
先ほど来あるように、今、国民からも
As people have been mentioned, the view towards Olympic Games in Japan is not quite positive, but maybe 10, 20 years later, maybe we hope that it is a game to remember, that it's good that we had that despite all those difficulties within the worldwide pandemic to have been able to have a successful Olympic Games, that Tokyo was able to bring that about. I hope that in a decade or two or in the future generation remember us for having led a successful event. We are hoping that there are a lot of still things we could contribute to make this a memorable event.
Thank you, the Honorable Ojima. Let's go to the Honorable Kobayashi. What is your opinion on how these games will be remembered?
In
having Olympics under the pandemic, how the athletes can participate without fear of their health, how we can curb the infection, how we can control the pandemic will be the major keystone for how we remember the games. I think there's lots of various opinions about whether it is really safe to have the Olympic Games now. I think we are now at a turning point on how we can conduct games as such under difficult situations. Maybe there are different ways of conducting it. And if the whole humankind is facing this pandemic, that it is an event, I hope that we can emit the message that we are all fighting together and trying to overcome this pandemic together.
Thank you very much for that, the Honorable Dr. Kobayashi. Let's ask Ms. Getchi the same question. What do you believe will be remembered?
はい、ありがとうございます。
Thank you for the question. Until now, Japan had a very positive image of the Olympics. The last one held in Tokyo was right after it was a post-war recovery for Japan, and then Nagano was another splendid one. And so this time is all of a sudden, it's not just a peace commemorating event. We don't really even know what the purpose of having this. It's no longer a recovery from the 3/11. So no one is quite sure what the purpose of the games is now. And it's not even a symbol of having overcome the pandemic, as we all are in the fifth wave of fighting the COVID-19. So even if it's a pandemic in a century time, a record pandemic, once something is decided that IOC is not stopping it, the Japan Organizing Committee is not stopping it. So what kind of a difficult decision we had made in trying to follow through with it. So I think people are going to start to question what is the real meaning of having the Olympics. So what the purpose is, what should be the objective. That is going to remain with us.
Thank you for that. And the Honorable Takeya, same question. You've spoken about this obviously some. What do you think the games will be remembered for as well?
This
Olympic under the pandemic, I think it's going to be remembered as a pair, the pandemic and the Olympics. So no spectators and no visitors from the overseas as had been planned. But I think worldwide, everybody is quite aware that these games are being played no matter what in Japan and will be receiving attention from Japan. So even though we would not have a physical visitors coming to Japan, but I think we will have a lot of attention worldwide, and hope that will have a positive impact on people getting interested in Japan, wanting to come to Japan. And so for touristic purpose, I think in the long run, it might have a positive impact. For the Paralympics, to make a universal barrier-free world, I think it already is a legacy for Japan that in Japan, there has been very little done to remove barriers for those handicapped people. And I think that for the physical side, that had been, the preparations had made way to remove those barriers, I think is a big legacy. And now that we have this Olympics without any commercial value attached to it, I think all of a sudden it's a very purely athletic event. Maybe it's going back to the very basics of what Olympics is, doing athletic competence.
Wonderful. Thank you so very much for that response. And I want to thank all four of our panelists, the Honorable Dr. Kobayashi, Ms. Getchi, the Honorable Ojima, and the Honorable Takeya for taking time out of their morning to talk with us today. Of course, we want to make sure that as our exchange work transitions to virtual engagement during the COVID-19 pandemic, it's vital that we measure the impact and effects of the virtual town hall series for our funding partners. To do this, we ask that audience members complete a brief exit survey. Zoom attendees can view the survey link on the Zoom post-attendee screen and will also receive it in an email tomorrow. Viewers on Facebook Live and YouTube can find the survey link in the video description on the respective platform. Thank you in advance for taking the survey and helping us measure the impact of our program during this time. Again, thank you all for participating. Thank you again to our attendees. If you are in the United States, have a great evening. And if you're in Japan, have a great morning and day. And I hope you find a way to enjoy the Olympic Games.